In our discussion a little while ago, we were talking about some of the laws of physics and when those came into being, and we said earlier that the laws of physics as we know them today came into being at the moment of creation, at the creation event. But it seems like if the young Earth position is correct, that the laws of physics changed at the fall, that what they're saying is that that was the first introduction of sin into the created order. But in fact, we see sin before the creation of Adam and Eve.
That's a good point.
The serpents are already in chapter 3.
If there's any validity to their principle, then the laws of physics would have to change at the fall of Satan, not at the fall of man. I mean, this is when sin was introduced into God's creation. So Adam wasn't the first sinner. Quite obviously, Satan had sinned before he had sinned. Now that raises a whole level of speculation. When did Satan rebel against God? And the scriptures, in my opinion, are not very specific as to when that event took place, although it seems quite clear that it took place before Adam and Eve sinned. I mean, after all, he was the agency of temptation, so he had to have sinned before either Adam or Eve had sinned.
I should bring up the point here that frequently the point is made that since God called the entire creation very good, and Satan was part of that creation, that he couldn't have sinned before that.
So maybe Satan sinned somewhere between the end of the creation days and chapter 3.
Right. Satan didn't sin before that point. He sinned at some point after that.
So
after
he
the
sinned
6
on
days.
the seventh day, not on the sixth day.
Or somewhere between the seventh day and
after
chapter
the 6th
3.
day.
Right.
So there's a little space there between chapter 2 and chapter 3 where he could have sinned.
Well, that would mean that, and from their position, the fall of Satan took place after the creation of Adam and Eve.
That's correct.
Which is completely an inference because there's nothing in the scripture, is there, Ken, that speaks?
Right, and I think we have to be cautious about any kind of chronology, but there is a couple points that I find relevant about that. First of all, I would argue that, in fact, there was no evil outside of Lucifer. But again, if I can quote St. Augustine, Augustine said that Lucifer's sin was not choosing an evil, it was choosing a good and exalting a temporal good over the greater good. He chose self over God. So I think that is a reasonable way of getting out of the problem of where did evil come from. But I'd like to discuss that issue of God conquering evil. I think central to a resolution of the problem of evil is that God is evidencing his glory through the conquering of evil. And I think in many respects, that's what he says to Job at the end of Job's difficult period. This is something in which I'm going to exhibit my glory. If that's true, then God could have been creating the universe with that central motif in mind, that creation is going to exhibit his glory and conquer evil, which could mean that the universe was created in accord with that.
Right.
That he built in principles already to effect a ultimate overcoming of evil.
But this requires a Calvinistic view of creation.
A very sovereign God.
Right. That God knew ahead of time exactly what was going to happen. In fact, he predetermined what was going to happen and therefore structured the universe in advance so that the best possible result would come out of his future plans.
And what is the final cause of the universe? It seems to me to glorify God.
That's right.
We want to be careful about establishing a hard chronology about when Satan fell. But
well,
we do.
What we can do is establish approximately when he was created, because Job 38:7 does make the point that the angels were witnesses to God laying down the foundations of the earth. So Satan was around at least before that moment in the creation chronology.
It does seem to indicate there that the angels were created before the creation of the universe.
Well, at least before the creation of the earth.
Okay.
So that would put them back in our perspective 4 or 5 billion years ago in the past minimum. And they could have been created before the universe. The scripture doesn't say that's not the case. What is difficult is to determine when Satan fell into sin. It could have been billions of years ago. It might have been just weeks before God created Adam and Eve. I'd leave even open the possibility that maybe it happened after the creation of Adam and Eve. I don't think that's likely, but I would argue that the text doesn't definitively rule that out. What it does definitively state is he was in a fallen state before he entered Eden.
I think we can conclude from that there was evil within the created order before Adam fell. There was
Right.
sin had already come into the picture before Adam fell. At what time that was, we don't know. But we want to be careful not to make it sound like Adam was the first time when sin entered into the
It's very
picture.
important in trying to solve this problem we're dealing with to make the point that Adam is not the author of the fall. I mean, that I think is really critical. And if Adam's fall is not the first sin or rebellion against God, then that helps to resolve a lot of the issues we've been talking about today.
Though he's completely responsible and guilty before God, that there is an underlying foundation for this cosmic evil.
Well, let me tell you where it takes us next. If indeed Adam is not the author of the fall, and indeed God is all-powerful and sovereign, then it was God's desire for Satan to penetrate Eden and to tempt Adam and Eve. What is God's purpose in all of that taking place? Because evidently this is part of God's good plan. It's part of his perfect plan that this take place. And in terms of his sovereignty, we need to realize he is powerful enough to prevent this from happening if he doesn't see this as the best good. If this isn't the best good, then you've got a problem with the sovereignty of God. Does that mean that Satan was able to overcome God's will and penetrate Garden of Eden against God's will? I don't think so. The sovereignty of God does not allow that as a possibility.